They said I'd love the senior home because it had bingo nights. That was the final insult dressed up as concern. After 42 years of building a home with my husband, raising 2 sons, managing every detail of a family's life while being overlooked, I was now just a financial inconvenience in silk blouses. The glossy brochure sat on the coffee table like a threat. "We just want what's best for you," they said, while calculating property value and dividing belongings I hadn't even packed. What they didn't know was this: I've spent decades being underestimated, and that's exactly how I like it. Let them think I'm old, confused, ready to surrender my autonomy. I have one last performance left in me, and when the curtain falls, I won't be in that bingo room. I'll be on a balcony somewhere far away, drinking wine, remembering who I really am. Let the show begin. The envelope was cream-colored, thick with formality, the kind used for wedding invitations or birth announcements. But this one wasn't celebrating a beginning. It was a summons. Eleanor Whitmore held it between her fingers for a long moment, her thumb tracing the embossed edges. The handwriting was unmistakable, Hannah's. Cursive so carefully practiced it felt theatrical. "Please join us for dinner this Saturday. We have something important to discuss." No smiley faces, no warmth, just precision. Eleanor placed the card on the marble countertop beside a half-finished cup of chamomile tea. The clock on the wall ticked softly behind her, a quiet metronome in a house now filled with too much silence. She turned back to the breakfast table where several manila folders lay spread out. Bank statements, investment summaries, a property deed, and a worn leather-bound notebook where Edward had once jotted ideas for retirement plans they never got to take. It had been 14 months since Edward died. 14 months since the house that once felt full of breath and banter had begun to echo. She used to joke that the refrigerator ran louder than Edward's snores. Now the hum of appliances was her only soundtrack. Outside the kitchen window, the Arizona sun painted long golden slashes across the backyard gravel. Edward had always hated grass, said it was too thirsty for the desert. He'd planted succulents and drought-resistant shrubs, efficient but beautiful, like him. She stared at a particular agave bush they'd picked out together on their 35th anniversary. Now it stood taller than she remembered, blooming defiantly, while he lay beneath the earth. She shook herself from the thought and reached for her reading glasses. Eleanor was meticulous, a habit formed from decades of balancing household budgets, managing birthday calendars, navigating PTA meetings, and ensuring Edward's business expenses were always reconciled down to the cent. Now her role was undefined. Not a wife, not an active mother, not even a grandmother who was needed. The numbers stared back at her, accounts totaling just over $2.1 million in conservative, stable investments Edward had stewarded over 4 decades, a paid-off house now worth at least $850,000, a rental property in Tempe, insurance policies, CDs, all neatly itemized, all hers. Yet lately, her sons, David and Lucas, had been interested, and not in the way sons should be. First, the casual calls from David asking if she'd considered downsizing. Then Lucas suggesting over brunch that she might enjoy community living. Each time cloaked in concern, but with eyes that flicked toward the future like poker players calculating odds. She wasn't paranoid. She was observant. There's a difference. Eleanor lifted the invitation again, rereading it. "We have something important to discuss." The phrasing felt staged, like a script read through once too often. A memory flickered. Years ago, when David was caught sneaking out as a teenager, he'd used the same phrase before confessing, hoping to set the tone, control the narrative. She set the card down again. Her hand reached instinctively for Edward's old chair by the breakfast nook. It still creaked under her weight, like it remembered him. She could almost smell his aftershave in the fabric. She closed her eyes, letting the scent settle her. "I hope you knew what you were leaving me with, Ed," she whispered into the empty kitchen. 2 successful sons, 2 smart daughters-in-law, and a plan I'm not part of. The last family gathering had been 7 months ago, Lucas' youngest daughter's birthday. Eleanor had brought a handmade quilt, each square stitched with symbols representing milestones in the girl's life. Chloe had smiled politely but set it aside like it was made of lint. The child never even unwrapped it. Instead, she opened a box containing an iPad. Technology replaced sentiment. Practicality replaced presence. Efficiency replaced her. Eleanor rose slowly, her knees stiff but steady. She moved to the living room where framed photographs lined the mantel. The boys as toddlers, Edward at their wedding, family vacations to Yosemite and Maui. They had built a life, a solid one, a legacy. So why did she now feel like luggage to be stored? Her eyes landed on a photo of the four of them, taken the day David graduated from business school. He had Edward's posture, but not his patience. Lucas had her eyes, but little of her gentleness. They had married women who knew how to host fundraisers and plan ski trips, but who rarely asked how Eleanor spent her days. Not that they needed to. They assumed she was fine. They preferred her that way, low maintenance, out of sight. Eleanor returned to the kitchen and poured the rest of her tea down the sink. The metallic clink of the spoon on porcelain echoed longer than it should have. She looked at the invitation one last time. "Saturday at 7, she said aloud. "Let the theater begin." Eleanor sat in her study that evening, the only light coming from the brass desk lamp Edward used to favor. It cast a golden halo on the walnut surface, highlighting the ledger she had just opened. A simple, old-school journal where Edward had logged every major transaction, month by month, year by year. There was a kind of sacred order to it. He was a man of habit, and this ledger was gospel. She turned the pages gently, trailing her fingers down the columns. It was part ritual, part investigation now. Something had nudged her earlier, a memory perhaps, when she glanced at the brokerage account summary from that morning, a withdrawal. Not large, not outrageous, but unexpected. Her eyes found the entry again. Withdrawal, $9,000, June 3rd. Special distribution. It wasn't the amount that troubled her. It was the description. Special distribution was not part of their regular withdrawal vocabulary. Edward never labeled things so vaguely. He was meticulous, almost fussy with financial records. Every movement had purpose, clarity, annotation. June 3rd. That had been the day after Lucas stopped by unannounced with a fruit basket and a 45-minute conversation about long-term sustainability. Coincidence? She clicked open the online account dashboard and began comparing transaction histories. Another $7,500 in July, $4,200 in August, all small enough to avoid detection by outsiders, all labeled with euphemisms: adjustment, estate prep, distribution to secondary. Who was the secondary? Her pulse began to rise. She reached for the small leather notebook Edward had kept on his nightstand. Inside were passwords, logins, notes about tax deductions, and more importantly, the names of every account with limited access. Some accounts had joint control. Others, like the investment portfolios, had been recently transitioned solely to her name after his death. Or so she thought. She opened a legal-size envelope labeled AmeriSecure Retained Assets. Inside was the confirmation notice from February, 7 months after the funeral, showing a linked advisor access was added. She stared at the fine print. Authorized party Lucas Whitmore. The pen in her hand tapped the desk with soft, rapid clicks. Lucas. It could have been an oversight. A helpful son assisting in a time of grief. She had no memory of signing over access. Maybe she had, in the haze of probate paperwork. Maybe. But then why hadn't he told her? Why the secrecy? Her stomach knotted. The invitation to dinner, the carefully timed concern, the recurring comments about streamlining and modernizing her lifestyle. It was starting to assemble like puzzle pieces she hadn't meant to gather. She thought she'd buried the seed of suspicion deep enough not to grow, but now it was blooming, dark and ugly. She leaned back, letting her eyes close for a moment. The armchair exhaled beneath her, softening the ache in her spine. What hurt more than the transaction wasn't the money. It was the deception. She'd spent her life trusting these boys, raising them to be men of honor. And here they were, calculating behind her back, slicing at her independence one polite suggestion at a time. She thought back to their childhood. Lucas had once cried for 3 hours because he lost a dollar bill he'd planned to use to buy her a Mother's Day card. David had argued with a grocery clerk on her behalf when he was 12, accusing them of overcharging her for apples. These boys, her boys, had once held her like she was the axis of their small worlds. Now they held clipboards. Eleanor opened a fresh page in her notepad and wrote, in all caps, Phase 1, watch everything, say nothing. Below that, she listed Sunset Gardens, research ownership Lucas, confirm full access history. David, does he know? Trust status. Call Adam backup email for communication. She didn't know the full scope yet, and she wasn't ready to confront them, not until she had clarity. But the shift inside her was irreversible. She was no longer a grieving widow hoping for connection. She was a strategist, a woman in quiet battle armor. As she shut off the lamp and made her way down the hallway, she paused by the guest bedroom. Still made, still pristine. Meant for grandchildren who never stayed more than an hour, a space frozen in unfulfilled potential. Let them believe she was oblivious. Let them smile and pour Chardonnay and speak slowly as if her mind had softened with age. She would give them that illusion, and then she would take everything else back. The driveway to David's house curled like a smug invitation, lined with manicured succulents and uplighting that made the desert landscaping look theatrical. Eleanor parked at the curb, taking in the angular modern home that felt more like a boutique hotel than a family residence. She sat in the car for a moment, palms resting on the steering wheel, pulse steady. This wasn't a dinner, it was a performance. And she was about to meet the cast. She adjusted her pearl earrings, Edward's favorite, and checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her makeup was subtle, her blouse a dignified shade of teal, not festive, not matronly, controlled. She exited the car and approached the oversized front door. Hannah answered, smile wide and blinding, like she'd practiced it. "Eleanor, you look wonderful," she cooed, leaning in for an air kiss that never quite landed. Come in, come in." The scent of expensive candles drifted into Eleanor's nostrils, bergamot and something synthetic. She followed her daughter-in-law through the open-plan entryway, noting how every surface gleamed. A cluster of abstract paintings adorned the walls, all curves and chaos. It was the kind of space designed to impress strangers. David rose from the couch in the living room, wine glass in hand. "Mom," he said, embracing her just long enough for the gesture to register. Lucas stood beside him, giving a brief nod before returning his attention to a tablet. "Good to see you," Lucas said, his tone flat. Chloe appeared from the kitchen, a glass of white wine already extended toward Eleanor like a peace offering. "Pinot Grigio, chilled just right," she said with a practiced grin. Eleanor accepted it, her fingers brushing the rim instead of the stem, a tiny act of defiance. "Thank you." They sat in the living room, arranged like a business meeting disguised as a family chat. The men took the couch, the women perched on opposite armchairs. Eleanor noted the absence of toys, drawings, or signs of children. This was not a home for family, it was a showroom. "Dinner will be ready soon," Hannah said, "but we thought we'd start with some drinks and catch up." Small talk filled the space like static. Hannah's recent fundraising event, Chloe's new Pilates certification, updates on schools Eleanor had never visited and grandchildren she barely saw. No one asked how she was. She sipped her wine, nodding, smiling faintly, and waited. When the roasted chicken and quinoa salad were served, David finally cleared his throat. "Mom, we really appreciate you coming tonight," he began, setting down his fork with exaggerated care. "Here it comes," she thought. "There's been something on our minds lately," Lucas added. "All of us, actually." Hannah's smile brightened. Chloe reached into a side drawer of the buffet and pulled out a glossy brochure, placing it beside Eleanor's plate. "Sunset Grove," she read aloud. The cover showed silver-haired seniors laughing over jigsaw puzzles and sipping tea in sun-drenched courtyards. "It's a beautiful community," Hannah said quickly. "Really top tier. They have fitness classes, art therapy, movie nights, everything." "And full medical support on site," Chloe chimed in. "So you'll never be alone in an emergency." Eleanor studied the photos, noting how none of the people looked real. Too perfect, too staged. She flipped to the last page. The monthly cost, $4,950, almost exactly what her house would rent for. "It's just a thought," David said. "We know the house must feel overwhelming without Dad. Too much space, too much responsibility." Lucas leaned in, elbows on the table. "And we've been talking to a realtor. The market's hot right now. You could get top dollar." There it was. The smile on Eleanor's face was as fragile as porcelain. "And what would I do with all that top dollar?" David hesitated. "Well, you'd invest it, of course. We could help with that. Make sure it lasts. So I sell my home, move into what is essentially a dormitory for seniors, and hand over control of my finances. For my own good?" A silence fell over the table. Hannah was the first to recover. "We just want what's best for you." Eleanor traced the edge of her wine glass slowly. "I see." The rest of the meal was consumed in polite tension. Dessert, some kind of artisanal tart, was served with decaf coffee and hollow laughter. Eleanor asked questions. She played along. She nodded at the right moments. But inside, her anger was cold, controlled, growing. They didn't see her as a mother. They saw her as an asset, one that needed liquidating, and they thought she wouldn't notice. The silence following Eleanor's question, sharp as it was, lingered like steam over hot soup. She didn't flinch, didn't frown. She merely sipped her decaf and offered a closed-lip smile, the kind you wear when you've heard a joke so bad it's insulting. David cleared his throat again. That habit of his, using a throat clearing like a punctuation mark, had followed him from childhood. It used to mean he was about to fib about breaking something. Now, it meant he was trying to finesse a conversation he had no control over. "Of course, this is just a conversation, Mom," he said carefully. "We're not pressuring you." "Oh, of course not," Eleanor replied, folding her napkin and laying it beside her untouched tart. "Just an idea, out of deep concern." Lucas nodded, catching the sarcasm but choosing to ignore it. "It's just, Sunset Grove has a wait list. If you decide too late, you might miss your chance at a really good unit. I wouldn't want to miss my golden opportunity to play bingo 3 times a week," Eleanor said, her voice cool. Hannah offered a forced laugh. "It's not just bingo. There are book clubs, dance nights, even wine tastings." Chloe leaned forward, tone bright. "And you wouldn't have to worry about things like landscaping or roof maintenance anymore. The house is getting up there in years." Eleanor's eyes narrowed a fraction. "So am I." Another pause, longer this time. "I didn't mean it like that," Chloe said quickly, cheeks coloring. "But you're right." Hannah jumped in, her tone too chipper. "It's time for you to relax. You've spent decades taking care of others. Now let someone take care of you." Eleanor let the flattery wash over her like tepid bathwater. There was no comfort in it, just emptiness wrapped in lavender-scented patronization. And then came the slip. "We already spoke with Meredith. She's the top realtor in the area," she said. Hannah's eyes widened too late. "You spoke with a realtor?" Eleanor asked, tone even. Hannah froze. Only in case you wanted to explore options," she said too fast. "Nothing's been decided." Eleanor turned to David. "And she did this with your blessing?" David shifted uncomfortably. We just wanted to be prepared. If you said yes. I haven't said yes. Of course, Lucas cut in. But these things move fast. We didn't want you to feel overwhelmed once you agreed. Eleanor blinked slowly. How thoughtful. Planning the dismantling of my home before I've even agreed to consider leaving it. Mom, you're taking this the wrong way, David said, his voice strained. We just want this transition to be as smooth as possible. Eleanor set her coffee down with practiced grace. The clink of porcelain on wood was gentle, final. Well, she said after a beat, it's certainly given me a lot to think about. The four faces around her brightened with a flicker of hope, mistaking her tone for acquiescence. Hannah leaned in, hopeful. We can schedule a tour as soon as next week, maybe even this weekend. Oh, I'd like that, Eleanor said warmly. But I'd prefer to go alone. I'd hate to be distracted by overly eager companions. A flash of confusion darted across Hannah's eyes, quickly masked by another smile. That's fine, Chloe offered. The staff are super friendly. I'm sure they are, Eleanor murmured. She rose from the table and the rest followed, scraping their chairs back in unison like a school assembly. David offered to walk her out, but she waved him off. I know the way. As she reached the front door, she paused and turned back toward them. They all stood there in the foyer, lined up like realtors showing a model home. Bingo night, sound, thrilling, she said with a half smile. Maybe I'll bring my urn when I move in. No one laughed. Good night, dears. She stepped into the night, the desert air wrapping around her like armor. As she reached her car, her shoulders fell, not from sadness, but from the weight of pretense. Inside, she exhaled, gripped the steering wheel, and allowed herself one small, wicked grin. Let them think she was old. Let them think she was fragile. She was done asking questions. From here on out, she'd play their game better than they ever imagined. The next morning, Eleanor's house was quiet, but her mind wasn't. She moved through the rooms with silent precision, her steps soft on the oak floors Edward had installed himself 20 years earlier. She didn't bother with breakfast. Her appetite had been replaced by something else entirely: strategy. She returned to the study, now her war room. The desk was neatly organized, the evidence laid out like a crime scene. Bank statements, property deeds, investment portfolios. She had spent the better part of the night rereading every document Edward had left behind, this time not as a wife preserving memories, but as a general preparing for siege. She reached for her notebook and flipped to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote in bold ink, "They think I'm slow." Below it, she added, "Lock all online accounts. Change trustee info. Call Adam's schedule, Sunset Grove tour. Find out how much Lucas knows by 9:15 a.m. She was on the phone with Adam Sandler, her attorney of over 2 decades and one of Edward's closest friends. He answered on the second ring. "Carolyn, sorry, Eleanor." He corrected himself with a chuckle. "I've been going through the old files lately. How are you holding up?" "Awake," she replied, "which is more than I can say for my so-called support system." His tone sobered immediately. "Talk to me." She outlined the situation, the push for the senior community, the financial suggestions, the unspoken urgency in her son's voices. Then she dropped the word that changed his tone entirely: unauthorized access. "You believe one of your sons accessed your accounts without full disclosure?" "I believe one of them. Lucas, I suspect, requested shared advisor status on an investment account I don't recall discussing. I also believe withdrawals are being made that don't align with my records or my consent." Adam didn't interrupt once. When she finished, he spoke slowly. "I'd like to meet in person, preferably at my office. Are you mobile?" "Very, and I can drive myself, thanks." He chuckled. "Thursday morning, 10 o'clock. Done." She hung up and immediately picked up her second phone call. Sunset Grove. The tone of voice she used with the front desk was deliberately cheerful, almost daffy. "Oh yes, hello, I was told there was an opening. I just wanted to see for myself, before the family gets too involved." Barbara, the facility's director, was more than happy to accommodate. "We love when potential residents take initiative," she chirped. "You'll love it here. It's very safe." That was the second time someone had said safe to her in 2 days. She wasn't looking for safety. She was looking for sovereignty. The tour was scheduled for the following afternoon. She hung up, poured herself a cup of black coffee, and sat on the front porch to breathe. The October sun was kind this morning, casting long shadows across the walkway. She closed her eyes and imagined Edward beside her, reading the paper, whistling. He had always trusted their boys. She wondered now if he'd been naive, or if she had been willfully blind. The sound of tires on gravel startled her. A sleek black car rolled into the driveway, too new, too polished. She set down her mug and stood. Lucas. He stepped out, dressed in business casual, tie loosened, smile artificial. "Morning, Mom," he said, already moving toward her like a man closing a deal. "I wasn't expecting visitors." "I was in the neighborhood." "You live 30 minutes away." He chuckled, brushing past the comment. "Thought I'd check in, see how you're feeling after dinner." Eleanor didn't reply. She gestured to the porch chairs. "Have a seat." He sat, crossing one leg over the other, glancing around like he was taking inventory. Again. "So, have you given any more thought to Sunset Grove?" She gave him a long look. "You're eager. I just want you to be happy, settled, safe." "Safe," she echoed, lips curling. "I mean, you've got a big place here, a lot to manage. Chloe and I worry about you." "I'll bet." He shifted uncomfortably. "There's no pressure, Mom, but the sooner you decide, the better for everyone. I mean, market conditions shift fast. Your house could lose value." And there it was. The thin veil lifted. Beneath the smiles, the urgency wasn't about her well-being. It was about timing, about control. Eleanor kept her voice steady. "I've scheduled a tour." Lucas blinked. "You did? Tomorrow afternoon, alone." Well, that's good. Very proactive of you." She smiled. "I do my best." But in her mind, she was already rewriting the ending to the play they were performing, and in her version, she didn't just walk off stage. She burned the script. Eleanor had barely returned from a brief walk when the doorbell rang. Still in her cardigan, she opened the door to find her older sister Margaret standing stiffly on the porch, a purse clutched tightly in front of her like a shield. "Margaret," Eleanor asked, surprised, "what are you doing here?" Margaret pursed her lips, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "David called me," she said. "Said he's worried, that you've been forgetful." Eleanor blinked. "Forgetful?" "He says you're confused about finances, that you're struggling. Living alone since Edward passed hasn't been easy for you, I know that. But if you need help, real help, we need to talk about options." The warmth that Eleanor had felt earlier, having a plan, being 2 steps ahead, began to chill. "So now I'm being evaluated by family?" she asked, voice even. Margaret looked down, then back up. "He said you refused their offer to help manage your accounts, that you're isolating, making irrational decisions." Irrational. The word landed like an insult disguised as care. Eleanor sat slowly in her reading chair. "You came all the way from Tucson because David told you I'm senile." "No one used that word," Margaret said, taking the opposite chair. "But Eleanor, he's your son. He's trying to help." "Did he mention Sunset Grove?" Margaret nodded. "He said it's a beautiful place." Eleanor chuckled under her breath. "What's so funny?" Margaret asked. "You remember when you broke your arm in high school and I filled out your college applications for you? Or when you forgot Mom's birthday 3 years running and I sent her flowers in your name?" Margaret blushed. "That was different." "Was it?" Eleanor stood, moving slowly now, like someone considering her next step on uncertain terrain. She shuffled slightly as she walked to the kitchen, deliberately letting her hand hover, as if unsure which cabinet held the teacups. Let Margaret watch. "You want tea?" she asked, her voice lilting, distracted. "Or Was it coffee you liked? I can't ever remember anymore." "No, I'm fine," Margaret said quickly, brow furrowed. Eleanor returned a moment later, empty-handed. "What was I doing again?" "Eleanor." Margaret softened her voice. "Are you all right?" "There it is. The bait." Eleanor sat back down and sighed. "Sometimes I forget names. Chloe's daughter? Oh dear, is it Abigail or Madison?" "It's Lily." "Right, Lily, such a sweet little thing, always asking about puzzles. Or was it paint?" Margaret tilted her head, concern mounting. Eleanor let the silence stretch, then dropped the next card. "You remember last Thanksgiving, don't you?" Margaret blinked. "Of course." "You had that little argument with Chloe in the laundry room. You thought no one heard, but I was folding napkins just down the hall." Margaret froze. "She asked you to talk to me about signing some papers." The color drained from Margaret's face. "She said something about transferring responsibility, called it a kindness. You told her I'd never go for it." Margaret swallowed hard. "I didn't think you remembered that." "I didn't. Until just now." Eleanor stood again, this time without the shuffle, without the hesitation. "I've made mistakes, Margaret. Trusting too easily, believing in proximity over truth." "I didn't sign anything," Margaret said defensively. I thought they meant well." "They never do when it comes to inheritance." The tension thickened like fog. Then Eleanor smiled again, this time wide, airy, confused. "Do you know where the restroom is?" she asked suddenly. "I forget in this big house." Margaret stood quickly, her hands hovering as if ready to assist. "Let me?" No, I think I'll manage." Eleanor left the room, took the hall corner, and the moment she was out of sight, her back straightened. She walked to the study, closed the door behind her, and picked up the phone. She dialed Adam. "Phase 1, she said quietly when he answered. "Let's begin." "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure." "Then I'll start the process. We'll move your investment portfolio offshore step by step, quietly. I want everything documented, everything traceable, but only to me. We'll make it look routine." He paused. "You're doing the right thing, Eleanor." "I'm doing what they made necessary." She hung up and looked around the room. The life she had built. Every ledger, every receipt, every framed certificate Edward once cherished was now ammunition. They wanted a confused old woman? She'd give them one, while she vanished, dollar by dollar. The sun broke gently over Eleanor's neighborhood the next morning, casting soft golden light through her linen curtains. It was the kind of sunrise she and Edward used to admire over Sunday coffee. Today, it greeted her like a countdown. The clock had begun ticking, not toward old age, but toward freedom. Adam had been true to his word. The trust documents arrived that morning via courier in a discreet envelope. Her name was neatly printed on the cover sheet, Eleanor Whitmore, Irrevocable Living Trust. She sat at her desk, her glasses low on her nose, scanning every line like scripture. The clauses were ironclad. The assets were now held in a trust only she could manage, and only under very specific, predetermined terms. The boys and their wives would have no access unless they met every condition Eleanor herself outlined: consistent care, honest communication, emotional presence. "Conditional love," she whispered. "Let's see how much of that you're really capable of." She signed each page carefully, the pen scratching quietly against the paper like a knife carving her escape route. By the time she reached the last page, she felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief, not yet, but anticipation. Adam had arranged the next steps with precision. The transfer of funds would be subtle. First, a small draw from a matured CD, then a dividend payment from a long-term investment account. All of it redirected to a private international account in her name, set up through a branch in Lisbon. Over the next week, Eleanor moved through her home with methodical detachment. She began sorting: what to sell, what to take, what to leave behind. She posted items to local antique boards, quietly, anonymously. Edward's model airplane collection sold to a retired veteran in Prescott. The silver dinnerware set went to a young couple getting married in Sedona. Each transaction was another step toward invisibility. She did it all without fanfare. No big cleanouts. No garage sales. She boxed the things she didn't want them to see missing until it was too late. Jewelry, family albums, important books. Items with sentimental value went into a single suitcase that she stashed in the guest room closet, tucked behind an old vacuum cleaner. To outsiders, nothing had changed. But inside her world, entire chapters were being folded and closed. Every morning, she checked her online accounts using a private, encrypted browser Adam's assistant had set up for her. Every evening, she updated her notebook with codes, timelines, contacts. It was all becoming real and irreversible. And then came the envelope. It appeared in her mailbox on a Wednesday afternoon. No return address, just a simple white envelope hand-delivered. Inside was a typed letter from Hannah. "We've contacted a moving company that specializes in elder transitions," it read. "They're offering a discounted rate if we book before the end of the month. Lucas and David are ready to assist with packing. We just want to support you in making this next step as seamless as possible." There was no if, no question, just a plan already in motion. She stared at the letter until her eyes blurred. They'd already decided to move her, whether she said yes or not. Her pulse didn't rise. Her hands didn't shake. The anger had come and gone like a fever. What remained now was the clarity of final decisions. She reached for her phone and called Adam. "It's time," she said simply. "I want the house prepped for sale, quietly, but I'm keeping control of the process." "I'll engage the property manager," he replied. "They'll stage it. You won't need to interact with anyone directly. Are you still aiming for a late November departure?" "Yes, but let's make sure the boys think it'll be December." Adam chuckled. "Deception suits you." "It's not deception," she said. "It's self-preservation." She stood from her desk and walked slowly through the house. The same walls that had once echoed with children's laughter now echoed with silence. She ran her hand along the hallway where David's height marks were still faintly visible. The baseboard where Lucas had cracked his head chasing the dog. They'd forgotten those things, or maybe they'd chosen to, but she hadn't. She stopped at the living room shelf and picked up a framed photo, her and Edward on their 35th anniversary, standing on a bluff in Big Sur, wind in her hair, his hand on her back. She packed it carefully into her suitcase, wrapping it in a scarf. This wasn't abandonment, it was evolution. She wasn't running from her family. She was leaving behind the illusion that they'd ever truly seen her. The final draft of the trust arrived on a cloudy Thursday morning, tucked in a plain brown envelope that belied the gravity of what it contained. But this wasn't the trust, the real one, not the one that would safeguard Eleanor's future. This was the decoy. As Adam had advised, she would need more than one layer of protection. The primary irrevocable trust, the one listing Portugal-based assets and outlining specific requirements for any future heirs, was encrypted and registered offshore, impossible to access without Eleanor's biometric approval. The second, a surface trust, was designed to be discovered. "If your sons become suspicious and start sniffing around," Adam had explained during their last meeting, "they'll find this version first. It's perfectly legal. Looks real, but it protects almost nothing." She'd signed both. Eleanor sat at her desk, both documents in front of her, and slowly turned to the third envelope, her decision to sell the house. This one was harder. She glanced out the window at the backyard. Edward's prized lemon tree, the cracked stone path they had laid together one spring, the wrought iron bench where they used to sit and drink lemonade like retirees in their own private resort. The house held memories. But memories weren't worth dying in a gilded cage. She picked up her pen, signed the sales authorization, and under designated beneficiary for any equity beyond trust contribution, she wrote a name no one in her family would recognize: Marina Alvarez. Marina was the daughter of a nurse Eleanor had once mentored in her bookkeeping days, a bright, relentless young woman who had cared for her own mother until the very end without ever asking for help. Eleanor had watched from a distance and remembered. Let the boys fight over the decoy documents. The real legacy would pass to someone who had shown quiet loyalty without expecting payment. She sealed the envelope and walked to her safe. The key turned with its usual resistance, and the door opened to reveal the black notebook Edward had kept for 40 years, their master log, where every major financial decision was recorded. She opened it to the last page and began writing in neat cursive: Lisbon Plan, finalized. She paused and then turned to a fresh page. This wasn't for the file. This was personal. This was for Edward. My love, they think I've lost my mind. I suppose that makes us even. You lost your heart before I lost my patience. It's strange, isn't it? How the people we raise begin to look at us like burdens the moment we start slowing down. I don't think you would have let them push this far. But then again, maybe that's why you left me the map and not just the money. The Lisbon Plan is real. Yes, Lisbon, the cliffs, the wine. The first place you kissed me without asking permission. I'll go there soon, and I'll take you with me. You always said we should go back. Now we finally will. Love always. E. She folded the letter, placed it inside a blue envelope, and slid it into the notebook behind Edward's last recorded balance sheet. She'd already arranged to take a portion of his ashes with her, a final shared journey to balance the one they never completed. That afternoon, Eleanor moved through Edward's study like an archivist. She ran her fingers along the spines of biographies, war histories, and investment tomes. Some warned the stitching, others unopened gifts from old clients. She picked out a few. The Art of War, bookmarked halfway through. Benjamin Graham's The Intelligent Investor, dog-eared and annotated. A paperback thriller he'd started 3 winters ago. Spine cracked, but page 103 forever paused by a faded receipt. One by one, she wrapped them in soft cloth and packed them in her suitcase. The rest would be donated, some to the community college, others to the veterans' home where Edward had volunteered on Saturdays. By dusk, her suitcase was heavier, but her chest lighter. She stepped back, taking one last look at the wall of books, now half empty. This was the price of clarity. This was what goodbye looked like, not with tears, but with intention. The air was different that Saturday. Still dry, still thick with that faint desert dust scent that always came before October rain. But there was something sharper in it now. Eleanor stood in the doorway of her home, the house she would soon no longer own, watching the horizon darken just slightly as afternoon slipped toward evening. The sky wasn't threatening. It was expectant. Everything had been prepared. The couches were arranged for a comfortable conversation. Her coffee table, cleared of its usual books and candle holders, now held only a tray of herbal tea and sugarless cookies, because Mom's health was always one of their talking points. On the fireplace mantel, she had deliberately placed the framed photo of her and Edward, their arms intertwined during a trip to Napa Valley, a small reminder of who built this place and why. At 3:45, the doorbell rang, right on cue. David and Chloe arrived first, dressed like they were meeting a financial planner rather than their own mother. Lucas followed 10 minutes later with Hannah, who wore a tight smile and carried a leather-bound folder. Eleanor welcomed them all with the serene warmth of a woman too tired to fight, too polite to offend. "I'm glad you could all come," she said, gesturing toward the seating area. "We're just glad you're open to talking," Lucas replied, already taking the armchair across from her usual spot. As they settled, she noticed the papers emerging, spreadsheets printed in color, charts clipped neatly into binders. The financial ambush was underway. "We've worked out a really straightforward plan," David began. It breaks down your monthly costs now versus what they'd be at Sunset Grove. Lucas added, and assuming we move quickly with the house, you could maximize the sale value before the holidays. Hannah smiled gently, flipping through her folder. We've also spoken to the facility again. They're reserving a unit for you, just in case. Just in case, as if she hadn't already made her choice. Eleanor leaned back, the picture of measured surrender. You've put in a lot of effort, she said. I suppose I didn't realize how much work I was becoming for all of you. Chloe reached out, touching Eleanor's knee with manicured fingers. It's not work, it's love. Eleanor nodded slowly, her expression wistful. Still, you all have busy lives. It's silly for me to hold on to so much space, so many things I don't really use. Lucas perked up. Exactly. And by moving now, you take control of the process, Mom. You're not being forced into anything. Not forced, just pressured, gently, consistently, relentlessly. She clasped her hands. I do have one question. Of course, David said. If I sell the house and move to Sunset Grove, who manages the proceeds? They exchanged glances. The moment she'd baited them for, well, Lucas said carefully, we thought it might make sense to create a shared trust, one where we all have oversight to make sure it's handled responsibly. And fairly, Chloe added quickly, so it benefits you and, eventually, the family. Eventually, Eleanor repeated, when I'm no longer here. David nodded solemnly. We just want to protect your legacy. She allowed a small smile. That's thoughtful. Inside, she imagined Adam at his office, clicking through the final confirmation on the property sale. The buyer, a retired couple from Colorado, had made a full cash offer. The contract was signed yesterday. Escrow would close in a week. None of them knew. None of them suspected. She turned her attention back to the table. Would you mind walking me through the numbers? She asked sweetly. I get confused with all those percentages. Lucas lit up. Of course. That's what we're here for. As he began outlining projected investment yields and withdrawal schedules, Eleanor glanced toward Edward's photo on the mantel. The corners of her mouth twitched upward. This was the performance of a lifetime, and she was just getting started. As Lucas walked Eleanor through the projected yields of her senior living adjusted investment portfolio, she nodded along, blinking occasionally as if overwhelmed by the financial jargon. Chloe handed her a printed document titled Post-Sale Financial Strategy, Family Oversight Proposal, and Hannah offered a pen. Take your time, she said gently, placing the pen in Eleanor's hand like she was a child signing her first field trip form. Eleanor didn't flinch. Instead, she gave a small, bashful laugh. Oh dear, it all looks so complicated, she murmured. But I've been thinking about something too. She reached under the table and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. A simple ribbon tied the top. On the front, Eleanor Whitmore Trust, 2025 revision. Their eyes lit up. Hannah leaned forward instinctively. David's hand twitched as if reaching for it. I had Adam prepare this, Eleanor said softly, just in case something happened. I didn't want you all worrying about paperwork if I took a fall or, well, you know. She set the envelope on the table. Lucas was the first to reach for it. He slid the ribbon off, opened it, and pulled out the neatly typed, notarized trust document. His eyes scanned quickly, Chloe and David leaning in behind him. It names us, Chloe whispered. We're the trustees, Lucas confirmed, voice flat with disbelief, with equal access. Hannah exhaled slowly, placing a hand on her chest. Eleanor, thank you. Truly. Eleanor gave a small smile. I just want peace, for all of us. The energy in the room shifted. The battle, they thought, was over. They'd won. David leaned back with a breath of visible relief. Chloe wiped at her eyes as if overcome with emotion. Hannah was already making notes in the folder again, recalculating futures that now included a 7-figure sum. Then Eleanor stood. There's just one more thing, she said. Her voice had changed, calmer, colder. The others froze, mid-gratitude. "I'd like you to check your email," she continued, "right now." David frowned, pulling out his phone. Chloe followed. Lucas opened his tablet. Hannah paused, unsure. Then the notifications hit, one by one. From Adam Sandler, Esquire, subject, revised trust document. For your review, only David's mouth fell open first. Chloe gasped. Lucas paled. Hannah's lips parted in confusion, then growing horror. This isn't the same document," David said, scrolling faster. "This lists a different trust, dated yesterday." Lucas spoke next. "This names a different beneficiary structure. You're sole trustee, no successor." "And no provision for us," Chloe added, voice cracking. "Correct," Eleanor said, her tone now steel. "What I handed you is a decoy, a version Adam and I created for this exact moment. The real trust, the one that controls every dollar of my estate, was finalized and filed separately. Only I have access, and none of you are named." Silence. Chloe stared at her in disbelief. "Why would you—" Hannah stood suddenly, hands shaking. "This is cruel. You had us believe—" "I had you believe what you needed to believe," Eleanor interrupted. "What you earned." David was flushed now, his eyes glistening, not with sorrow, but anger. "We're your children." "You were," Eleanor replied, "until you decided I was more valuable, silent, managed, and tucked away." Lucas slammed the decoy trust on the table. "We've done everything to support you." "No," she said. "You've done everything to secure your convenience. There's a difference." Hannah's tears had begun to fall, silent and slow. "We were just scared. After Edward died. We didn't know how to help." "Help?" Eleanor laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You didn't ask how I was sleeping. You asked how I was investing. You didn't bring groceries. You brought brochures." Chloe opened her mouth, but Eleanor raised a hand. "You don't get to cry now," she said softly. "The moment you treated me like a liability," she continued, each word deliberate, "you lost the right to my legacy." They sat in stunned silence, blinking as if slapped, and Eleanor stood straighter than she had in months, her voice a steady metronome over the quiet room. "The house is already sold. The assets are already moved. I gave you a version of the truth you wanted to hear because you were never interested in the one I lived." She turned toward the mantel and picked up the photo of her and Edward. "When I leave this house, I won't be running away. I'll be walking towards something, finally." She didn't wait for a response. She walked past them, through the hallway, her steps steady, the air behind her heavier with every footfall, and they remained seated, silent, stunned, and powerless, as their inheritance slipped quietly out the front door, along with the woman they never truly saw. The morning of her departure began like any other, but it carried a stillness, a reverence, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Eleanor stood at her bedroom window, gazing out at the lemon tree. A single bright yellow fruit dangled stubbornly on the outermost branch, swaying slightly in the breeze. She smiled. Edward would have made a joke about that one last lemon, about how it was a late bloomer with a strong sense of independence. She dressed with care, linen blouse, navy slacks, the scarf Edward had brought her from Lisbon on their honeymoon. She added a single gold pin, shaped like a compass, a quiet message to herself. In the hallway, her suitcase waited, 2 carefully packed bags, a carry-on, and a small tote. The rest of her belongings had either been sold, donated, or boxed for pickup. A lifetime of memories distilled into a few essentials. She made a final sweep of the house, room by room. The living room, where they'd hosted Christmas mornings and summer poker nights. The dining room table, now bare, once covered in laughter and spilled wine. Her kitchen, the place she'd taught Chloe how to bake and where David used to sneak spoonfuls of frosting when he thought she wasn't looking. All of it stayed behind. None of it was worth more than her peace. When the taxi arrived, she stepped outside without looking back. The driver, a young man in his 20s, offered to help with her bags. She thanked him, slid into the back seat, and as the car pulled away from the curb, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it vanished entirely. Eleanor didn't cry. She had already done that, 8 months ago, standing in the same doorway, listening to the hollow sound of a house without Edward in it. At the airport, she moved with quiet efficiency. Passport, ticket, security. Her seat, business class, one way to Lisbon. As she settled into the window seat, she pulled out a notebook and began writing. Not a list, not a plan, a declaration, the Freedom Clause. By Eleanor Whitmore. I am not running. I am reclaiming. This life, whatever remains of it, belongs to me. To the woman who gave everything and asked for so little. To the wife who stood beside her husband as he built, saved, provided. To the mother who became invisible the moment she stopped serving a purpose. I revoke your assumptions. I cancel your convenience. I declare with full authority that my value does not end where your inheritance begins. Let this clause be irrevocable. Let this be the day the story turns. The plane lifted off with the quiet grace of a promise kept. Eleanor watched the desert fade beneath a layer of clouds, and then it was gone. 7 hours later, she stepped into Lisbon's autumn air. It greeted her like an old friend, warm with a sea breeze, perfumed with salt and tile dust. The property was exactly as Adam's contact had described, a modest 2-bedroom villa perched on a gentle slope overlooking the sea. Whitewashed walls, cobalt shutters, a terrace with morning light and evening shade, a lemon tree in the back garden. She unlocked the door. Inside, the space smelled of fresh paint and wood polish. Everything was simple, elegant, unfussy, just like she'd asked. She placed her bags in the corner, took off her shoes, and walked barefoot to the terrace. From there, she could see the coastline curve into the distance. A fisherman cast a net from the rocky edge. Children's laughter floated from somewhere nearby. The world moved on, unbothered by the dramas of old money and familial schemes. She breathed it in, freedom, sun, a second beginning. The next day, she received 3 emails, one from Lucas. Subject, please talk to us. Message, we were wrong. Maybe not about everything, but enough. We were scared of losing control. That doesn't excuse it. But I want to understand. I want to fix things. She didn't reply. The second was from David. Subject, I guess we underestimated you. Message, not sure what hurts more, the money or realizing we never really knew you. I hope you find peace. Really. She didn't reply to that one either. The third was from Chloe. Subject, thank you for the lesson. Message, you were right. We treated you like a problem to be solved, but you solved yourself. I'll never forget that. That one made her pause. She hit reply. Message. Sometimes the only way to teach respect is by removing yourself from where you are disrespected. Take care of your daughters. Teach them better. She hit send. Then she closed the laptop and made herself a cup of strong Portuguese coffee. From the terrace, she could hear the sea whispering. And for the first time in years, she answered back. Not with obligation, not with silence, but with a quiet, unwavering yes. Yes to freedom. Yes to herself. Yes to the chapter they never saw coming. The days passed gently in Lisbon, each one folding into the next like waves upon the shore. Eleanor had traded appointments and manipulations for morning walks through cobbled alleys, markets bustling with voices she didn't fully understand, yet found comforting all the same. Her steps were slower, but steadier, her breath deeper, not because of age, but because the weight had lifted. But she was not drifting. There was one final card she hadn't revealed, not even to Adam. On the 3rd Saturday of her new life, she boarded a train to the southern coast, the Algarve, a stretch of wild cliffs, whitewashed towns, and sunlight that danced without apology. Her villa there, more modest than the Lisbon house, waited on a quiet hillside, where fado music played softly from cafes and neighbors greeted her like a long-lost cousin returning home. But the villa wasn't empty. As she stepped through the garden gate, a tall woman in a wide-brimmed hat looked up from the roses. "Took you long enough," she said with a smirk. Eleanor grinned. "I had to make an entrance." Her name was Julia Moreau, a French-American friend from Eleanor's university years, a former tax lawyer who had retired in Portugal 5 years earlier after losing her husband. They had reconnected months ago after Edward's death in a chance email that turned into weekly correspondence. But that was only the surface. Unbeknownst to her children, Julia was more than an old friend. She was now Eleanor's trust supervisor and witness. With dual citizenship and no heirs of her own, Julia had agreed to act as both administrative support and a physical buffer. Should Eleanor ever need to prove mental competency, testify, or simply have backup? It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. And it worked. "I had the piano tuned," Julia said as they walked inside. "Figured you'd want it ready." Eleanor stepped into the sunlit living room, where a sleek black upright stood near the window. She sat on the bench, ran her fingers across the keys, and began to play. A few hesitant notes that settled into the melody of "As Time Goes By." They didn't speak. Julia brought over tea, and they listened to the notes settle over the villa like old dust swept away by sound. Later that evening, Eleanor sat on the terrace, a pen in hand and a postcard in her lap. On it, a photo of the Algarve cliffs, golden light touching turquoise water. She wrote slowly, deliberately. "Dear whoever still cares, the food's better here, even the nights. I sleep with the windows open. The breeze doesn't ask questions. It just knows where to go. I don't need to be needed anymore. I only need to be whole." If you ever find yourself wondering why, read between your own silences. That's where my decision was born. No regrets, just peace. And olives. EW, she didn't address it. She didn't need to. They'd know. She slid the postcard into a mail slot at the cafe the next morning, then wandered down to the beach where fishermen hauled in nets, and kids laughed like nothing bad ever happened. On Sunday afternoon, Julia handed her a small box. "It arrived yesterday," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Thought you might want to open it alone." Inside the box, wrapped in old tissue, was Edward's fountain pen and a folded note Eleanor didn't recognize. The handwriting, however, was unmistakable. "My dearest Elle, if you're reading this, it means you did it. You made the hard choice, the dignified one. I knew you would. You always had more fire than anyone ever gave you credit for. That's why I married you. That's why I trusted you to outlive me with grace and fight like hell if anyone tried to shrink you. I hope wherever you're reading this from, you've got a good chair, a better view, and no one telling you what to do. Live like I'm still beside you. Choose dignity. Choose life. Forever, E." She sat for a long time after that, the note trembling slightly in her hands. She didn't cry. Instead, she stood, walked to the edge of her terrace, and looked out at the endless blue. The wind was wild, the kind that carried everything away, and Eleanor, finally, gloriously, let it.